Have you ever wondered why narcissists panic the moment you stop apologizing? Why the simple word enough carries more power than every tear, every explanation, every fight before it? It's because something shifts inside you. Not a collapse, not despair, but a silence so steady it unsettles the room. For years, you have carried emotions that were never yours. You have taken the blame, shrunk yourself to keep the peace, confused sacrifice with love. But when that burden grows too heavy, the breaking point comes, and it doesn't shatter you. It awakens you. Jung discovered that this moment is not an ending. It is a beginning. He saw empaths, the most tender and giving souls, reach their limit, and instead of becoming hard or cruel, they became unbreakable. And this is what terrifies the narcissist most. Not your rage, not your pleas, but the instant you no longer play their game. Because the awakened empath doesn't fight back with the same weapons. They don't scream louder. They don't outmaneuver lies with better lies. They simply see through the illusion, and the narcissist's power collapses in an instant. Jung called this transformation a kind of psychic alchemy. The poison you carried for years burns away, and in its place rises something they cannot touch. Sovereignty. Think about it. The very sensitivity they mocked as weakness becomes your shield. The very depth they tried to exploit becomes your clarity. Their words no longer pierce. Their guilt no longer lands. Their control no longer binds. And here is the secret Jung realized. It doesn't take war to reclaim your power. It takes one unshakable decision: to stop apologizing for who you are. Let's get started. Jung discovered that the moment an empath awakens is nothing short of alchemy. For years, they carry what others cannot face: the grief of a parent, the rage of a partner, the shame of an entire family system. It sits inside them like lead, heavy, toxic, and then, in one pivotal moment, the lead begins to change, not by disappearing, but by transmuting into something Jung called psychological gold. Because your empathy was never a weakness, it was capacity, a vessel so deep it could hold what others denied. And Jung observed that this very capacity makes you capable of the most extraordinary transformation. He called it enantiodromia, the principle that everything, when pushed to its extreme, eventually flips into its opposite. The endless giver becomes the conscious chooser. The absorber of shadows becomes the mirror that reflects them back. The sensitivity that once left you vulnerable sharpens into a blade of discernment. And here is the part most people never see. Narcissists sense this change before you even name it. They may not understand it, but they feel it. Because the moment you awaken, you don't fight them on their battlefield. You rise above it, and it vanishes beneath you. Jung documented this shift over and over again. He saw that what looks like fragility is often strength in disguise, waiting for its moment to emerge. Like a seed buried under winter soil, underestimated, overlooked, until the day it splits stone. Think about your own life. How many times have you apologized for cruelty that was not yours? How many times have you said yes while your entire being screamed no? How many times have you mistaken exhaustion for love? And yet, when the breaking point comes, something flips. The same wiring that made you vulnerable becomes the very source of your power. Jung realized that empaths are not destroyed by suffering. They are remade by it. The shadow you once feared becomes the map back to wholeness. This is the dark discovery, that the very qualities a narcissist tried to exploit, your sensitivity, your openness, your depth, are the same qualities that, once awakened, make you untouchable. Next, we will figure out how each of these stages transforms the empath from vessel to force, and why every narcissist unconsciously fears the day you begin to walk this path. Jung observed that the empath's awakening is not a single moment. It is a process unfolding in thresholds, each one carrying you further from illusion and closer to sovereignty. First, recognition, then integration. And finally, sovereignty. The first threshold is like lightning. Suddenly, patterns you have endured for years come into sharp focus. You remember every time you apologized for someone else's cruelty, every time you silenced your truth to avoid their storm, every time you believed that love meant disappearing into sacrifice. Jung called this the lifting of the veil, when the unconscious becomes conscious. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Recognition hurts. It shatters the illusions you built your life around. But it also cracks open the first doorway to freedom. Recognition shows you the truth, but integration gives you the tools to live it. This is where shadow work begins. For years, you have been told to suppress your anger, your boundaries, your right to say no. You learned to call them flaws. You learned to feel guilty for even having them. But Jung discovered that these are not flaws at all. They are the missing pieces of your strength. When you reclaim them, something profound happens. Your anger becomes protection. Your selfishness becomes self-care. Your boundaries become the architecture of your freedom. And the paradox is this: as you integrate your shadow, your empathy doesn't shrink, it sharpens. You stop absorbing pain blindly and start seeing its source with surgical clarity. Jung observed that integrated empaths become psychological seers, able to sense manipulation before it even begins. The final threshold is sovereignty. Here, you no longer seek validation from outside. You don't beg to be seen, you see yourself. You don't wait for permission, you move from your own authority. Jung described this state as individuation, becoming whole, not because life spared you pain, but because you transmuted it. And here is the empathic paradox. The more you integrate your shadow, the more compassionate you become. But this compassion is no longer naive. It is fierce. It is discerning. It terrifies those who once fed on your unconscious giving, because now you choose consciously where your heart goes. Recognition, integration, sovereignty, these are not abstract ideas. They are the lived thresholds of transformation. And they are what make an awakened empath immune to the very dynamics that once consumed them. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Jung discovered that the empath's awakening is not theory. It reveals itself in life's rawest places, in the office where masks slip, in the family where guilt binds, in the intimacy where love turns into control. And if you have walked these roads, you know they don't feel like philosophy. They feel like fire. Sarah had a colleague who thrived in the shadows. When projects succeeded, he claimed the credit. When mistakes happened, he deflected the blame, often onto her. At first, Sarah doubted herself. Maybe I explained it poorly. Maybe I need to try harder. Every meeting left her questioning her worth. But then came the shift. She began to see the pattern, the gaslighting, the subtle digs, the way he fed on her doubt. Jung called this the unveiling, the moment unconscious dynamics become visible. So she stopped defending herself, stopped explaining what needed no defense, stopped giving him the emotional fuel he lived on, and almost instantly, his mask began to slip. Without her unconscious participation, others saw what she had endured all along. He grew frantic, his charm fractured. Sarah hadn't fought harder. She had simply withdrawn her energy, and the predator crumbled. Michael's mother wielded guilt like a blade. If he set a boundary, she threatened illness. If he succeeded, she reminded him of her sacrifices. If he disagreed, she became the victim. For years, Michael believed his role was to regulate her emotions. He mistook endurance for love. But when he began shadow work, something shifted. He realized his boundaries were not cruelty, but truth. He stopped apologizing for protecting his own life. The next time she spun the web of guilt, he did not argue. He stayed calm, said no, refused to be drawn in. At first, her tactics escalated, louder threats, sharper guilt. But eventually, she had no choice but to face her own emotions without him as her regulator. Michael had become manipulation-proof. Lisa lived on eggshells. Every mood was hers to manage, every criticism hers to absorb. She told herself that his harshness was helping her grow. But Jung identified projection as one of the most devastating manipulations. And when Lisa saw it, everything changed. She realized his attacks were mirrors of his own self-hatred. Every insult he hurled was something he couldn't face in himself. So the next time he lashed out, she didn't defend. She stood in silence, watching the projection fall flat. The relationship ended quickly. Without Lisa feeding his illusion of superiority, there was nothing left. And in the quiet after, Lisa felt something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. In every story, the empath did not become cruel. They became conscious. And Jung discovered that consciousness itself is what terrifies the narcissist. Because once you awaken, the game ends. Not with revenge, not with rage, but with the quiet power of no longer playing. And if one person's awakening can collapse a toxic dynamic, imagine what happens when thousands begin to awaken. Entire systems begin to tremble. That is where we're going next. Jung discovered something most psychologists were reluctant to admit. When an empath awakens, the ripple spreads far beyond their personal relationships. It begins to shake the hidden structures that keep entire families, workplaces, even societies running on unconscious manipulation. Think about it. Families often lean on one person to carry everyone else's emotions, the peacemaker, the strong one, the selfless giver. Workplaces survive on employees who overextend, who say yes when they mean no, who quietly shoulder blame to keep the machine running. Even cultures are built on this silent sacrifice, teaching certain people, often women, that their worth lies in service, silence, and endless endurance. And who usually fills that role? The empath. Jung observed that when an empath awakens, they don't just disrupt a narcissist's control. They disrupt the entire ecosystem that depended on their unconscious participation. Because when you stop absorbing, when you stop managing, when you stop playing the role assigned to you, the system itself begins to collapse. At first, the backlash can be brutal. Families accuse you of being selfish when you set boundaries. Colleagues call you difficult when you refuse to carry blame that isn't yours. Friends withdraw when you no longer validate their dysfunction. Jung identified this as the tension of opposites, the inevitable clash between new consciousness and old patterns. And yes, it feels like everything resists your awakening, because it does. Your very presence now exposes what others would rather keep hidden. But slowly, something else begins to happen. Your refusal to play the unconscious role forces others to confront their own shadows. Your boundaries become a living model of what healthy love looks like. Your sovereignty sends out what I call permission waves, signals that tell others it's possible to be free too. Jung believed that every personal transformation contributes to the collective unconscious. Each time one person breaks a destructive pattern, it leaves a new imprint in the human psyche. You are not just healing yourself, you are expanding what's possible for everyone. And this is why awakened empaths are so dangerous to unconscious systems. They reveal truth beneath performance. They expose how much of what we call normal is really dysfunction dressed as duty. They embody a way of living that makes manipulation not only harder, but unacceptable. Imagine what happens if more and more empaths awaken. Workplaces lose their scapegoats. Families lose their silent absorbers. Cultures lose their most obedient servants. The system would have no choice but to evolve. Jung once remarked, "The world hangs on a thin thread, and that thread is the psyche of man." He meant that human survival depends not on politics or technology, but on consciousness. And when the empath awakens, refusing to carry what was never theirs, they become that thread, strengthening the collective psyche. This is why narcissists fear your awakening, not just because it ends their hold over you, but because it threatens the entire unconscious system that gave them power in the first place. And so the question becomes, where are you on this path? Because Jung discovered 3 distinct levels of empathic development, and knowing your level is the key to understanding both your vulnerability and your strength. Jung discovered that the empath's journey doesn't unfold in chaos. It moves in patterns, 3 distinct stages, each carrying its own gifts and its own dangers. He watched countless souls pass through them. And when you know where you are, the path ahead becomes startlingly clear. Here, you feel everything, but you understand almost nothing. It's like walking through life without skin. Every emotion pierces you, yet you cannot tell which feelings are yours and which belong to others. You believe love means endless giving. You mistake boundaries for selfishness. You confuse exhaustion with devotion. Jung observed that unconscious empaths attract manipulators like moths to a flame. Because without boundaries, you absorb it all: the guilt, the rage, the shame, while predators feed freely on your energy. It's painful, but it is also the soil where awakening begins. Because eventually, the weight becomes unbearable, and that breaking point pushes you toward the next stage. Here, something shifts. You begin to see patterns. You start learning about projection, shadow work, boundaries. It's like stepping out of a fog and realizing that what you thought was just life was actually a script written by unconscious forces. At this stage, new questions rise up. Why do I feel drained after certain people? Why do I explain myself endlessly to those who never listen? Why do I confuse chaos with love? Jung called this the birth of conscious empathy, the moment you begin choosing when and how to engage your gift. It feels liberating, but it also comes with danger, because as you awaken, others resist. They call you cold. They accuse you of changing. And in a way, you are. This stage is messy, but it is also the crucible where your strength is forged. This is the rarest stage, the culmination of Jung's process of individuation. Here, you no longer fear your sensitivity. You master it. You can feel deeply without drowning. You can love fully without losing yourself. You can give generously without being depleted. Jung identified this as psychological sovereignty, the ability to remain centered in your own truth while still open to others. At this level, you embody what I call the integrated warrior healer. Compassion in one hand, boundaries in the other, able to see through manipulation instantly, yet responding with clarity instead of chaos. And this is what terrifies narcissists most. They cannot use you anymore. Their tricks fall flat. Their power collapses because you no longer feed it. So ask yourself, where are you now? Still unconscious, absorbing everything without knowing why? Awakening, stumbling but seeing through the fog? Or sovereign, standing in the full power of your empathy? Wherever you are, Jung discovered that the path forward is always the same: deeper consciousness. But with greater power comes greater responsibility. And that is what we must face next: the shadow side of awakening and the ethical weight of your strength. Jung discovered something unsettling about awakening. Every new power carries its own shadow. And for the empath, the danger is not only what others might do to you, it is what you might do with your newfound strength. At first, awakening feels intoxicating. For years, you were silenced, dismissed, exploited. And now suddenly, you see through masks that once fooled you. You sense manipulation before it even begins. You can expose lies with unnerving clarity. And the first temptation is revenge. To finally make them feel what you felt. To use your insight not to heal, but to wound. But Jung warned against this trap. Because revenge, no matter how justified it feels, still chains you to the very dynamic you're trying to escape. It keeps you mirroring the narcissist instead of transcending them. The empath who chooses revenge may feel powerful in the moment, but they are not free. Another danger is what Jung called inflation. You begin to believe your awakening makes you superior. You look at those still trapped in unconscious patterns with contempt instead of compassion. You forget your own journey, the years you stumbled blind, the pain that opened your eyes. Jung observed that this arrogance is simply another form of unconsciousness, because the moment you believe you are above others, your shadow slips back in through the side door. True sovereignty carries humility. The awakened empath remembers their own suffering and honors the slow, messy process of becoming conscious. So what does healthy power look like? It looks like clarity without cruelty, boundaries without bitterness, compassion without naivety. Jung discovered that the highest expression of empathy is what he called conscious compassion. It doesn't mean enabling. It doesn't mean rescuing. It doesn't mean losing yourself in someone else's storm. It means seeing clearly, loving wisely, and refusing to participate in dynamics that destroy you. Because once you awaken, people will feel your power. Some will be drawn to it, hoping you will use it to guide and inspire them. Others will resent it, because it exposes what they would rather keep hidden. And you must decide every single day how to wield this power. Will you use your insight to manipulate or to liberate? Will you guard your boundaries with rigidity or with grace? Will you become another predator or a sovereign healer? These are not abstract questions. They are the daily crossroads of the awakened empath. Jung reminded us, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. For you, that means facing not only the darkness of others, but the shadow within yourself, owning your capacity for cruelty, pride, revenge, and choosing, consciously, a different way. Because the empath who integrates both light and shadow becomes something rare, a force of love that is also a force of truth, safe for authenticity, dangerous to manipulation. And when you reach this point, you are ready for the final step, the closing of the circle. The moment you step fully into sovereignty, not just as an individual, but as part of a movement reshaping the human story. So let's bring this full circle. We began with the breaking point, that quiet, terrifying moment when you stopped apologizing, stopped absorbing, stopped carrying what was never yours. And we have walked through Jung's dark discovery that this awakening transforms you from fragile vessel into sovereign force. You have seen how recognition shatters illusion, how integration turns suppressed shadow into living strength, how sovereignty births the empathic paradox, compassion sharpened by discernment. You witnessed Sarah at work, Michael in his family, Lisa in her relationship, each living proof of the same truth, that consciousness dismantles manipulation without a single raised voice. You felt the ripple effect, how your awakening doesn't just change your life, but threatens entire systems built on unconscious sacrifice. You traced the roadmap: unconscious empath, awakening empath, sovereign empath, and you recognized where you stand today. And you faced the warning that with power comes temptation. The temptation of revenge, the inflation of the ego, the shadow you must hold wisely or risk becoming the very thing you escaped. Now you see what Jung realized. Your sensitivity was never a weakness. It was your radar, your compass, your early warning system. Your depth was never too much. It was proof you were designed to feel more, to see more, to carry more. And now, that same depth makes you immune. You are not fragile. You are not broken. You are not too sensitive. You are awake. And the awakened empath terrifies narcissists because they cannot use you anymore. Your silence dismantles their performance. Your boundaries erase their control. Your authenticity exposes their illusion. But this is not just about you. Jung believed that when one person becomes conscious, it creates ripples in the collective unconscious. Your awakening makes it easier for the next person to awaken. Your sovereignty sends out permission waves that travel farther than you will ever know. So when you choose to live as a sovereign empath, you are not just healing yourself, you are healing generations. You are reshaping family patterns, workplace cultures, even cultural norms. You are living proof that sensitivity and strength are not opposites, but allies. So I leave you with this truth. You will not always be understood. You will not always be applauded. Your awakening will unsettle those who prefer the unconscious comfort of dysfunction. But remember what Jung called the privilege of a lifetime: to become who you truly are. And who you are is both gentle and fierce, compassionate and discerning, a healer and a warrior. If you have felt this transformation stirring inside you, claim it now. Say it aloud, write it in the comments. I am sovereign in my empathy, not as a slogan, but as a declaration, a marker of where you stand in your journey, a signal to others still lost in the fog that awakening is possible. If this content resonates with you, share this with someone who needs to remember their power. Because the more of us who awaken, the faster the unconscious systems crumble. And if you want to go deeper into Jung's insights on how empaths can protect their light from those who would drain it, watch my other video, When the Empath Snaps, Carl Jung's terrifying truth about awakening. It will show you the next piece of Jung's dark discovery. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, because this is not just a channel. It is a movement of awakening. And you, with your awakened empathy, are part of it. Remember this: you are not too sensitive. You are exactly what this unconscious world needs to wake up. And that, above all else, is what terrifies the narcissist.